about this for the last few days. I don't know whether it's a realistic possibility, but I think it's worth discussing because it leads to a lot of great conversations that are very instructive about how you really feel about this Seahawks team. Chris Jones, one of the best defensive linemen available or out there. I mean, he's one of the best in the league. He's unhappy right now with his contract situation in Kansas City. He's holding out. He didn't play yesterday. They lost the game without him. Would he have made a difference? Who knows? But he's one of the best in the league. And he plays a position, defensive end, that a Seahawks team absolutely needs. If you were to trade for him tomorrow, he immediately replaces Mario Edwards on the defensive end spot, and all of the sudden, your defensive line is Jaron Reed between Draymond Jones and Chris Jones. And I would argue at that point, you are a Super Bowl contender. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you got to realize Chris Jones, if it weren't for Aaron Donald, people would be talking about Chris Jones, not in the same way as Aaron Donald, but you'd be talking about him as perennially the best interior defensive lineman in the NFL, which he's been for the past, 6 seasons.
And he does it all. He can stop the run. He gets to the passer. And certainly in the kind of 3-4 defense they want to run, he is like built perfectly to play opposite Draymond Jones. So is he available? Hard to say. Right now, the answer is no, but we talked to Carrington Harrison, who is our guy in Kansas City, hosts the show there in the afternoon. He's great, by the way. And he says if he were to be traded, the price might not be quite as high as you think.
I actually think that he's worth the second-round pick. I think it's unrealistic to think that you're getting a first-round pick at this stage of the game. I think you could have got the first-round pick back in March or prior to the start of the draft. But if I'm a team, and you also got to think, I mean, Kansas City's not trading him to Cincinnati. They're not trading him to a team that you think is good in the AFC. So, and then in the NFC, if you're a team that doesn't think that you're going to be very good, like if you're Arizona, for example, or you're Chicago, for example, where you have a first-round pick and you also have Carolina, you might be trading the 11th overall pick for Chris Jones. So I actually think that a second-round pick is probably the right amount of value, and maybe you throw in a second and a 5 or a second and a 4.
Kind of interesting. I think most of us believe that it would take at least a first-round pick, but he's the guy in Kansas City, so I'll at least trust him for now. Or let's go even more conservative and say, all right, cost the first-round pick. If you're the Seahawks, you give up a first-round pick right now today in order to get Chris Jones?
If all you're talking about is the draft pick compensation being the impediment, and is the question just, do you want to give up a first round pick? Yes, and I do think that is the absolute baseline when you consider that Jamal Adams got traded 3 years ago for 2 first round picks and then some, and I think the rationale from Carrington was that it's after the draft right now, so that the Chiefs wouldn't be able to reap that benefit right away until next April. But that was also the case with Adams. Remember, that trade happened while we were on the golf course.
Yes.
At Druids Glen Golf
Course.
Number
14 at Druids, yes.
In July, before training camp. So a similar situation there. I just can't see him being traded for anything less than at least 1 first-round pick and then some.
But obviously it's not just that. It's not just the pick. It's more than that. You've got to pay the guy.
He wants to get paid. Yeah, he's in the last year of his deal right now. He's set to make, I think, $19.5 million this year. And so this is where I think this is where it gets tricky for the Seahawks. And I'll start this whole soliloquy by telling you a story. And I'll bring it back to why that story is relevant to this situation. So 2013, remember, the Seahawks made the big trade for Percy Harvin. And not only did that trade not work out on the field, it was a fiasco in the locker room as well. And that trade caused problems. And I'll tell you, the story I'll tell you is a quick one. It was that one player, I'm not going to tell you who, but one player that I've talked to said that after the Seahawks traded for Percy Harvin, remember, they paid him right away. They traded for him, immediately gave him what at the time was the richest contract in franchise history. Again, that was before they paid Russell Wilson and everything. So, but at the time, it was the biggest contract in team history. That rubbed a lot of guys in that locker room the wrong way. In fact, one of them told me that he marched up to John Schneider's office and said, when it's time to pay me, I'm making more than that guy. And that wasn't even a wide receiver, okay? And we all know all the issues in that wide receiver room that those guys had with Percy and that Percy had with them. A lot of that was, a lot of that bubbled to the surface because Percy Harvin was a volatile player.
So let me just understand what you're saying here. The player was upset and marched up to the office because I've been here and this guy hasn't.
Yes.
He just showed up and immediately got paid, and that's not fair.
Yeah, and that was not just that one player who felt that way. That was a lot of players, and and you know, remember all the issues that in the receiver room alone. Remember, those guys were fighting. Percy Harvin was fighting with those guys 2 nights before the Super Bowl and beyond that. Now, as I was saying, part of that was that Percy Harvin was just a really volatile guy, but a lot of that resentment, a lot of that tension stemmed from the fact that he got paid, and a lot of guys who had been there for 2-3 seasons had not yet gotten paid, and it caused a ton of issues and resentment in the locker room. And I think the Seahawks made a decision after that and said, you know, if you trade for a guy again, you're not going to pay him right away. You're going to make him establish himself in that locker room, prove himself to his teammates, and then he gets paid. So look at the trades that they've made since then.
There's
big
sort
trades.
of 3 more trades that I would put, maybe 4 in that same category. Jimmy Graham.
Right. So Jimmy Graham, that was sort of a different scenario. He had 3 years left on his deal. He wasn't getting paid.
So that one doesn't count. We'll throw that one out. The next one would probably be
Sheldon Richardson.
That's what I was going to say. If you want to count Sheldon Richardson, who they didn't pay right away, right?
Right. He was playing on his 5th year option, and they made him play out that deal and didn't re-sign him after that season. So Sheldon
based
Richardson,
on what KJ has to say about him, it doesn't sound all that surprising that they chose not to sign him.
Right.
So yes, okay. Sheldon Richardson's number 2. Number 3 would be Dwayne Brown.
Dwayne Brown later, midway through that same year. Remember, Dwayne Brown was holding out from the Texans because he wanted a new deal. He wanted out of that situation. They didn't pay him until the next offseason, right? So they made him, come in, play half that season. He gutted it out on a sprained ankle, proved himself to that locker room, played at a high level, and then he got paid. So then go 2 years after that. Jadeveon Clowney.
Oh, Clowney, yeah.
Yeah, remember Clowney was playing on the franchise tag. And he wanted a new deal in Houston. They made him play out on what they sort of reworked the contract a little bit, but he didn't get a raise. In fact, I think he even took a slight pay cut maybe to make that trade happen. So they didn't give him a new deal, and they didn't end up re-signing him after that season. Same thing with Jamal Adams when they traded for him in 2020. Remember, he played out that I think he was on his the 4th year of his rookie deal. He played that out, and then he got the new deal next offseason. That's not a coincidence that all that happened. That is the Seahawks saying they're just not going to acquire a guy in a trade and pay him right away before he has really proven himself in that locker room. And so the question, as we turn it back to Chris Jones, is would Chris Jones be willing to do that? And my sense is this is different than an Adams situation. Remember, Adams wanted out. He was done.
He didn't want to be in New York.
Right. He was done with that organization.
And
I think
the
Clowney.
same is probably true with both Clowney and
certainly with Dwayne Brown. Yeah, remember Dwayne Brown was outspoken against the owner
because
there.
The Jets and the Texans are clown show organizations, whereas the Chiefs generally do things right.
Right, and they are, by the way, the reigning Super Bowl champions. And look, I think look no further for evidence that this is a different type of situation. Chris Jones, they had that charity function the other day. He shows up to the charity function. If a guy is so hell-bent on getting out and there's so much bad blood there, he's probably not going to do that. So I just look at this as a totally different situation than the situations where the Seahawks have traded for guys in the past. And I just don't know if he's so willing to get out of KC that he would be willing, or so wanting to get out of KC that he would be willing to play out the final year.
Yeah, that stuff all makes sense.